All right. Thank you again, Mitch, for speaking as always. So now we'll be moving on to the Q&A portion of the panel, where attendees will ask questions and panelists will decide what questions they'd like to answer. Time limit should be 2 to 3 minutes per question per panelist. I'll give warnings when you have a minute left. All right. So first question is from John. I've been following events in Sudan and their fight against the regime. One of the demands of the movement in Sudan has been the withdrawal of Sudanese military troops from Yemen. Can panelists comment on the role of Sudan in Yemen? All right, maybe we'll ask a few and then people can decide which ones they'd like to answer. What are agendas promoted by the US and Saudi Arabia? Question from Anne May. Stan alluded to the importance of Yemen as a travel port. Are what we're seeing in Yemen a continuation of this colonial desire to control naval routes for resources? Additionally, specifically for Imam Ibrahim, what is the status of democratic governance in Yemen? Does their legislature have any real power on domestic affairs? All right, so that's our first batch of questions. Any panelists want to uptake these? Okay, Stan?
Well, just a little bit. I have read a little bit about the Sudanese involved in the war. And from what I understand, they were treated as mercenaries. The Saudis would get the last Sudanese government, which was a dictatorship, and they would say, all right, you know, get us 10,000, 20,000, whatever the number was, and we'll give them some money, and we'll give you, the government, a cut. And so that was one way to get people to work, by being mercenaries. And I do remember reading an account of these Sudanese soldiers being in Yemen and being very bitter, saying that they would get their orders by radio from the Saudis or the UAE military officers. They would do the Sudanese would do the bleeding. I don't think that's ended. It may have been reduced somewhat, but I think the Sudanese so-called reform government is still only a minority, and it's the military officers there that are still important. So why don't I leave it to my other panelists to talk about some other of these things.
Great, thank you, Stan. Mitch, okay, go ahead.
Ibrahim, if you want to go first, go ahead.
Mitch, go ahead, Mitch.
Okay, so with the uprising, you know, the kind of the working class uprising in Sudan, also one of the main components of that was bringing the Sudanese troops home, which is something we see very often when we have these kind of you know, grassroots independent working class uprisings, is that there's solidarity, right, between the working people in Sudan and the working people in Yemen, just as there was a lot of solidarity in the Vietnam War anti-war movement, right? So, you know, Black troops were constantly saying, you know, if I'm going to fight oppression, I'm going to fight it right here. You're oppressing me. The Vietnamese aren't. And I think this is kind of a characteristic that hit me very close to home after when I was in Iraq. You know, I had not been there particularly long. I was very young, and some young guys took a couple of shots at me from a rooftop. You know, they were maybe like 15 or 16 years old. And I realized very quickly that despite being raised in completely different cultures halfway across the world, I guarantee I had more in common with those young guys that were shooting at me than I did with anybody who decided we should be at war with each other. And I think that's why, you know, working people need to be the ones that stand up and say, we're done with this. Workers have no stake in an imperialist war. You know what I mean? I had no stake in going and destroying a country in the Middle East. It didn't make my life better. It made it worse. And it certainly made the people of Iraq's lives worse. So that's what I talk about when I talk about international solidarity is working people understanding that fact, that you have more in common with workers in other countries than you do with anybody who really decides that you should be somewhere shooting at someone else.
All right, thank you, Mitch. Ibrahim?
Yes, okay. In regard to the status of democratic governance in Yemen, basically, based on the constitution, Yemen is a democratic and, parliamentary and presidential system, which they give the constitution give the president a term of 6 years. It's not like here, and for the parliament 4 years. That's based on the constitution. However, if you ask me, what is the current or the moment status, all of them, they are controlled by, foreign power, whether they are the government that are located in which is recently they moved to Aden, whether they are the Houthis or all of them right now, in my opinion, if you ask me my perspective, they jumped over the legislator and the constitution, and everyone are governed by power of, foreign powerful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibrahim. All right, so we'll do the next batch of questions.
Can I say something about the Congress?
Oh yeah, you can go ahead.
Because that was one of the questions. The Democrats as well as the Republicans were all working with Saudi Arabia for decades. Roosevelt, FDR, met with a Saudi king attended by his slaves. That's how things started. And the work we've tried to do against the war here in Connecticut. Now, one of the people who've been very out front in criticizing Saudi Arabia for the war in Yemen and for things at home in Saudi Arabia was Senator Chris Murphy. And he did make some great statements, but he wouldn't work with us, with people trying to reach him, trying to cooperate with him. Nothing. And when there were some issues in Connecticut, you didn't hear from him. One was University of New Haven that I alluded to very briefly. It's the only college in the United States that does work for the police and military of Saudi Arabia. There's this military police college in Riyadh, and UNH has its professors over there helping them with training cops and such. We brought this up to the press after Khashoggi's killing. It got worldwide attention. Never heard a word from Murphy. Blumenthal made one press release saying something like, well, we really should look into that. There was the only Connecticut politician who said anything. On the higher level, Bernie said nothing until, let's say, 2016, or what he said was bad. He said that we ought to look to the Saudis for guidance in the Middle East. Now, much more recently, he's taken a good position. And in the last few Trump years, the Congress, especially the Democrats, but even a whole bunch of Republicans, have turned against this Yemen war and have with several votes, have said, the U.S. should not be involved in this war. And I call that the anti-declaration of war. But we know that Trump knocked it down. But that was it. Congress didn't do anything like putting a section of the National Defense Act and that would stop help for the war. They didn't do that. Nancy Pelosi was asked to, she wouldn't do it. Nor did they make this any article of impeachment. Congress has the only power to declare war. Congress made it very plain, not only weren't they declaring war against Yemen, they were against it. And Trump went ahead with it anyway. But they never used this as an article of impeachment. So that's where things stand.
Yeah, I mean, if I can hop on real quick about the legislature and Connecticut senators and all that sort of thing. I mean, what is the number one industry in Connecticut? It's the making of military weapons, honestly, right? We have most of our manufacturing base is making the planes and the bombs and the gears and the rotors that all go into feeding the war machine. So Chris Murphy can say all the nice platitudes he wants, but he knows that if he comes up against the military industrial complex, there goes his funding for his next election campaign, and there goes his seat at the capitalist imperialist table. So I have no interest in appealing to the morality of state power, because it doesn't have any. So in my opinion, who we should be appealing to is the actual workers themselves who are making all these things, who would be much rather making something that is good for the world. I mean, we saw that when the coronavirus pandemic broke down. There's a big GE plant that makes weapons of war in Lynn, Massachusetts. And those workers were getting laid off because there was less demand for some of their things. And they said, no, keep us at work and have us make ventilators, have us make PPE. We are the manufacturing base of the Northeast. We can make these things. So it has nothing to do with the morality, which is obviously war is immoral, but that's not the case. We can't appeal to the immorality of people who make their policy decisions based on what's good for profits. That's what's gotten us into this mess. And until the working class decides that it's not going to buy into those illusions anymore, things will go on as usual, and war will be a constant feature of capitalism, and so will climate change and the destruction of the environment.
All right, thank you, Mitch. Anyone else for this round of questions? All right, so on to the next batch. It's from Steve L. What do you make of the congressional vote to stop U.S. aid to the Saudi war against Yemen? It was vetoed by Trump. What will Biden's stand be? What will Congress's stand be? All right, then we have a question from Wyatt. With the recent change of leadership at the top of the U.S. government, do you see any reason to think the Biden administration will change course with regards to Yemen and imperialist aggression, or make any changes to actually benefit the people of Yemen? And then,
sorry.
Yeah, okay. We'll just do those two for now.
So it kind of goes right into what Stan, Ibrahim, and I were just kind of talking about. The change in administration, it might even be worse for peace options. Biden has already come out and supported Juan Guaido as the president of Venezuela, who was never elected, and wants to increase pressure on Venezuela to accept him as their ruler. He's also said we need to get more aggressive with China, as well as, the consistent beating of the war drum against Iran. So no, the change in administration doesn't matter. And in my opinion, that's because the administration doesn't matter. It's because we have a dictatorship of capital, right? And war is good for the capitalist class. It's terrible for workers, but it makes a lot of money for the people that make profits. So it doesn't matter who you get into an administration in a system like we currently live in, because the system is based on making profits, and war is super profitable. You can only use a bomb one time, and then they got to make another one. So again, just like I said last time, I don't think we need to appeal to the morality of the state. We need to raise the consciousness of the working class and force, we make everything. We can, workers can say, we're not making bombs anymore. We're making solar panels. We're done with it.
Awesome, thank you. Anyone else for these two questions?
Yeah, I can answer the last question, which is relating to the Houthis.
All right.
Just give me 1 second. What was that question? Could panels go more in depth into political history and orientation of the Houthis? Perhaps their social composition as well. Okay. And I see the the webinar, they focus about the humanitarian crisis in Yemen, and none of the participants yet, I mean, they mention even what's happening within the Yemen, what's happening inside Yemen, because I see Stan, which I agree with him. There is no doubt. There's a lot of criminals, a lot of bombs that are happening by the Saudis and Arab allies, and also, but what's absent here is what's happening inside. I'm Yemeni and I'm a journalist there, and I have a partners, friends who are at the moment. Some of them, I just talked with him 2 days ago, and they are away. They are out of Yemen because of the Houthis. No one can cover that. This group, they talk over Yemen in 2014, and the problem with them, people, they left up the white flag, but the problem with them, they don't want to be government. At the same time, they don't want to move a little bit with their agenda. This is the biggest problem. In my opinion, they talk over. No one can argue with that, whether with this reason or another. But what's happening inside, just within this week, in one part in Yemen, in Taiz, they bombed almost 20 or 30 houses, residents, and they invented this kind of torturement that never happened in the most recent Yemen. I mean, the most recent history of Yemen. Since they left, they came with from Sada in 2014 up to this moment, hundreds of houses were bombed. Thousands of people, they evacuated. They left their houses and they live right now in desert or so. Hundreds of journalists, some of them, just last year, a couple of them, between 15 and 20, they came out from the prisons of Houthis. Some of them, they stayed only for 1 day or 2 days, some of them week, and then they died because of what they were experiencing inside the prisoners. And last week in Taiz, in a part of Taiz, it's called Haima. Maybe you can just Google it and look what they happen. They hang up some groups even on the trees. They killed them. To be honest, the way they treated the Yemeni people, it created that kind of confusion. Should we like Saudis and allies, or should we stay here with this kind of group? There is big conflict happening with the Yemeni people. I don't blame them. I don't blame them because it's very complex. Those kind of people, they did not, take advantage from the history. In my opinion, there's also big problem with the inside. That's why I'm saying when we talk about the solution, if there is no pressure, also, believe me, even if the Saudis stop bombing today, do you think are we going to come up with a solution? Definitely not. The humanitarian side, and the crisis will aggravate it more. It's gonna happen. It's gonna get worse in some situations or another. But the problem, there should be a solution coming from all sides, not from one side. And neglect or avoiding another part. That's my about the who are they? Basically, they believe Houthis is a kind of if you heard about the Shia Imamiyah, which is they believe that with the superiority of their race, they believe that they have the right, regardless, believe me or not, if there is any democratic system, they will not win even in one county. I'm positive that. They take over by the weapon, by the threat, and by the way they did right now. And they know for sure that if there is a democratic system, the people will never let them go. So they take advantage from the situation. That's why the war served them. The continuation of the war will serve them, and the stability, if we get to the point that the people elect or choose their government by their freedom, by their choice, that's my opinion about the Houthis and what's going on about them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibrahim.
Imam Alsuraymi, could I ask you, are there positive forces inside of Yemen? I read a couple years ago they had talked about the rebirth of the left. I obviously know nothing about that. I mean, are there forces that are trying to bring out democracy, people's rights? What about the Marxists that had been mentioned from years and years ago? Did they disappear? What can you tell me about that? Can you tell us about that?
What is it? What is it?
Are there positive groups inside of Yemen, groups that are trying to settle the war and work for people's rights?
Yes. There are people who currently, they understood the lesson. I can claim that. They understood the lesson after the Arab allies failed to achieve their goal. They involved this war to, as they mentioned, to lead the ship to this safety spot, as they mentioned, right? There are a group, and there are some people inside Yemen. They try to make a settlement from inside, but to be honest with you, it's really, if there is no power, that's what I believe. U.S. again, in my perspective, they are the key. Because that's, perhaps I'm right or wrong, but I see when there is good and clear intention, and there is no, because that's the problem. To be honest, let me be clear. I told you, even though the Emirates, believe me, look to the war right after, from 2014 until within 1 year, the Arab allies, they clear out the south of Yemen from the power of Houthi, and they reach out to the border of north, and they stop over there. There is some ajnada behind that. Even the Emirates, there is such places in Yemen, such as in Taiz. This place, Houthi has no, how can I, he has no background within the people. They carry different perspective than Houthis, but Arab allies themselves, they look at Taiz as a place of a brotherhood or Islam party, and they never let them go. And to be cleared, because you said if we stop from them, and then we will get rid of Houthi, and the Brotherhood will take over, and then so believe me, they play game with different places, whether inside Yemen or the north of Yemen. It's you know, it's very complicated to understand what's going on in Yemen.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ibrahim. And I think that's why we raise up the demands of Yemen Day, which is to get all foreign interference, you know, out of the country, to really let the Yemenis have a form of self-determination, right? If the Houthis have no real composition within the Yemeni people, no base of power within the Yemeni people, if the Saudis and you know, American allies aren't giving weapons and bombs, the Yemeni people can really decide for themselves what their future looks like. And that's what's important, right? Is a form of democracy and a form of working people's power to decide what the future of their nation's going to be. So that's why I support, and Socialist Resurgence supports the demands of stopping foreign interference in Yemen and increasing humanitarian aid and that sort of thing, you know, to ensure that people have food and medicine and that's and can decide for themselves what their government's going to look like.
One thing I would say is, as Mitch brought up, we sell a lot of weapons. It wasn't just Trump. I mean, that was, you know, just obscene the way he did it. But Obama sold enormous amounts of weapons to Saudi Arabia. And people here, and even in Connecticut, working people, a lot of them are in the weapons industry. So we do need something different to say you can do something different other than make guns. For instance, why don't they make the masks? Is it the N95, which is the ones that the doctors use? We've had this plague for a year, and they haven't been able to make an N95 mask for the average person. Why can't you just get them free, or at least get them from a nominal amount in the drugstore? Certainly we could be doing that. We could be using our labor power to make something that's beneficial. But there has to be some kind of plan. It can't be just said abstractly. There has to be a plan that says, you know, we're going to actually stop this armaments, and in those places we'll clean it out, we'll put in this, we'll put in that. And then I think you could get a lot of working people over to that idea. But it needs to be spelled out in very specific terms.
All right. So I have some more questions. Can you please talk about the relationship of climate change and the war in Yemen? Can you talk more about the role of U.S. imperialism in the Middle East and how it relates to what's happening in Yemen? What way forward to end the war and allow people in Yemen to determine their own future? What can workers and students around the world do to help end the war in Yemen?
Yeah, thanks, Omar. I'll take up a couple of those. So what is the U.S.'s agenda in the Middle East? I mean, it's obviously always been about the resource control, right? Whether that's oil or the shipping lanes that are in the Middle East and that sort of thing. The United States is a company obsessed with petrochemicals, and it's been about resource control and resource extraction for the benefit of American-based petro companies, whether that's Halliburton or the various others. I mean, that's really why we invaded Iraq, and it's why we're still there, and it's why there's so much American aid, or whatever you want to call it. Well, it's why America has an agenda in the Middle East, right, in North Africa, and decides who they're going to ally with and give weapons to and who they're not going to. As far as what can workers and students do to stop the war in Yemen, I think we can lay that out very simply. You know, here in the United States, we need to make an independent, large, and broad anti-war movement that, you know, basically calls for U.S. hands off and stopping United States interference in the war in Yemen, in Iraq, and Afghanistan, and Syria, and Venezuela, and Cuba, and Iran against China. Whole hog, and it's not. It needs to be principled, and it can't ally itself to the bourgeois parties of the Democrats and the Republicans, because their opinions change with profits, where the profit centers are. So I think what needs to happen is we need to organize together and make broad coalitions against the war. And that should be relatively easy in the time we find ourselves in now, with climate catastrophe and the problem this country has with white supremacy and police brutality. These are all interrelated issues, right? So we go to war for a resource in the Middle East. War is one of the most carbon intensive things you can do. So what we need to do is really link link these things together and come together with large coalitions and start to really win over the labor movement to a position of being anti-war again, and doing so workers understand their own power and understand that, if there's no one to make the bombs and there's no one to go shoot each other, war is done. It's over. It's really that simple.
I don't think there's direct connections between climate change and the civil war and the foreign interventions. I don't think it yet, but it's going to be a lot more of that as the climates collapse. I mean, there were studies that said in the decades that come that the heat will be so intense, particularly in the Persian Gulf area, that people will not be able to live and work outdoors. You have temperatures of 130 degrees Fahrenheit. People will not be able to work outdoors for any length of time. And it's going to really harm those countries there. Of course, a few people have super air conditioning and will get laborers who will work for an hour or two outside before they make them go underground or whatever. But I mean, it's going to make things more and more unstable. So the issue of warfare and climate change and preservations of human-centered climates are actually connected. And so the fight, for instance, in Connecticut against the killingly fracked gas plant that seems to be going in, that Lamont is not fighting against, that's connected. As far as workers do, I think what they should be doing, in addition to what Mitch said, is I think they have to fight for a different economy. We need an eco-socialist economy. We can't continue the way we are. We can't just live off of making guns and burning up all the fossil fuel and all that kind of stuff. We need a different society, something that's planned out, that people can do honorable work, that is going to make things that people need. And that's far from what any of the politicians are talking about, even Bernie. We need something in that regard. And a little commercial here for the organization I work for, Promoting Enduring Peace. We have a very bold plan on our homepage, pepeace.org, about seizing the fossil fuel industries and getting a planned economy. So people should check that out.
All right, thank you, Stan. So now we'll end the Q&A portion. We'll get into concluding statements where people can give their final remarks on their stances and plug anything that they have coming up. All right, who wants to go first? Maybe Stan?
Well, I just spoke, so why not one of the others?
Okay. Yeah, okay.
Sure, okay. So I guess in conclusion, we're going to drop a form in the chat here. If you have any interest in signing up on getting emails about the anti-war work that we know we're going to need in the coming future, go ahead and fill that out. Stan has been a long time anti-war activist here in Connecticut, and we need to grow that movement and become more coordinated and together. as well as, you know, educate yourselves on the situation going on around the world and take a stand. Also want to do a couple plugs here. Tomorrow there is a forum on put on by C3M, or Connecticut Climate Crisis Mobilization, and 350 Connecticut, called COVID, Climate, and Capitalism. And it's going to be a fantastic panel with a bunch of folks on it, some epidemiologists, someone who studies kind of climate change and the emergence of pandemics, our very own Ben Martin from 350 Connecticut. So should be a really fantastic panel, kind of delving into the multifaceted crises we find ourselves in right now, which is COVID and climate change and economic devastation. Other than that, I'm with Socialist Resurgence. We're an organization, you know, a revolutionary socialist organization that sees the need for workers to take control of the means of production and create a world based on solidarity, respect, and ending the exploitation of the capitalist class against the working class. So if you're interested in us, check out socialistresurgence.org, or you know, shoot me a message or email, and be glad to talk about it more. Thank you, thank you, Oscar, for moderating, and thanks, Stan, for being a part of this. Really appreciate it.
All right. Dan, if you'd like to give your final remarks.
Couldn't hear.
Oh, if you'd like to give your final remarks. I'm sorry about that.
Okay. Well, I'd say number one, stop all foreign intervention. The US, the Saudi, Iran, all these countries, UAE. Obviously, that's not going to settle everything in Yemen, but it would be a huge step, and we need to support that. Now, in terms of what we can do, one of the things is the campaign against UNH. UNH has this 5-year plan to, a contract with that Saudi police college. We've campaigned against it without success, but the 5 years ends in this year, 2021. And so there should be some kind of organization to, picket UNH or whatever to try to not have that contract be renewed. And then I would just mention 3 websites: SaudiUS.org, which was formed by a coalition of groups about 5 years ago to talk about Saudi and the Yemen war and so on, SaudiUS.org. TheStruggle.org that I've mentioned, and that has those archives about Yemen and about Saudi Arabia. And finally, PEPeace.org, the group that employs me. I think people would get a lot out of all those sites. Thank you.
All right, so that concludes our panel. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you, everybody. That was great.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening.
Yeah, so long, everybody.